Okay, it's just about to start. Come on down. Oh, sure.
How long have you had the worm farm?
If you count conception, 6.5 years. Yes, sir. But I've had my doors open paying rent since it's been 5 years January.
Okay.
But I mean, there was a lot of, I flew out to Wisconsin and just learned a lot about the worm. You know, that's another thing I was going to talk about is like the whole goal was to like hit the pure casting that I was using, that I saw that a lot of people were selling. It wasn't necessarily pure stuff, you know. And then as I kept doing it more, you know, I realized that I can focus just as much on building the soil, you know, and having both in there, you know. So whatever leftover material I wanted to be just as good. It's been a natural progression, that's for sure.
Any diseases that you have to deal with worms?
As far as to the worms, you know, there's protein poisoning you can give the worms, but I mean, at this stage in the game for me, it really hasn't been an issue. I have such a rotation now with babies and adolescents that it's like anything that does happen to adults' worms, I don't even think I notice.
Take a minute and we'll be going.
Sure.
We'll wait down there. So clear to the end in front right.
You not staying?
Oh, I got you. Okay. Oh, worm castings, t-shirts, all kinds of fun stuff.
Nice.
Yeah, I just got here in time. Huh? What's that here? So you saving your seat there? I'm doing good. How you doing? Yeah, good. Well, you know, yeah, that's why I left you. I understand. You know, it's already dawned on me. You know how we have a tendency to look through our own eyes, right? How'd you get this?
It's on the seat.
Oh, that's not being safe for anybody. Oh, shit. Okay, let me know. You've got you there, buddy. Oh, fantastic. Yeah, and, you know, so, me, you know, I'm just so
Come on in.
ridiculous.
Okay, we're going to get going. Hey there, Bob from Oregon's Constant Gardener. Sean Bundy, grain-fed worm castings. He's going to say some stuff, and then we're going to give some stuff away after it's over. So take it away.
Cool. How's it going, guys?
Hey, hi.
So just wanted to start off by telling everybody, you know, like, one of the things I feel like I'm most successful with raising worms and their casting and producing casting is my passion for the industry, my passion for the worm. Like, since I've started to care for worms, I started to realize, you know, just how important they really are, almost on a magical sense, you know. So it's just, you know, I started off in soil in 2008, okay, and then the more I learned, the more I realized that worms are soil, right? So the energy that I have in this, I feel like it's something that really can't be faked. Like, the more you guys, anybody that knows me, to see me talk about this, it's like, you know that I'm for you guys. It's like one of the most things that I come first is being a grower and caring about, you know, how it interacts with your plants. Okay, and so I've been incorporating worm casting in my garden for over a decade. Okay, the response I got from worm casting instantly showed me something new. From that day forth, I've been experimenting with different ways to utilize this black gold in my garden. Somewhere along the journey, the popularity of worm castings grew exponentially. One of the first things I noticed was the stores selling worm castings was not what I knew as worm casting. These products were a fraction of the price and looked nothing like the granular casting I was buying. I immediately saw a need I wanted to fill. Literally from that day, 6.5 years ago, I've been trying to figure out how to get those 100% pure worm casting granules in a bag. To this day, I can't get only that material. 2 years ago, I thought, why should I try so hard? The things I feed the worms are great for soil and plants in general. So why not concentrate just as hard on my feed and my inputs as I do on the worms? The feed and the environment I'm creating in the bins is just as much as good for the grower as it is for the worms. Lactic acid bacteria, carbohydrates, proteins, fungi, and other bacteria, enzymes, and amino acids from plants and sugar base. And then a little bit about like the grain itself that I've written down, and why I feel it's better than manure. Is one of them being like I use so many different grains and vegetables in the process, and each vegetable or grain that I put in has its own individual benefit. Okay, for instance, the oats I use are high in proteins, sugars, dietary fibers, vitamins, minerals, and omega fatty acids. The pumpkin feed that I use is extremely high in vitamin A, C, and potassium. Vitamin C and potassium are highly beneficial to plants. Grain, because of its high sugar content, is extremely attractive to microbes. One being yeast and its need for sugar. I add lactobacillus bacteria to ensure I create a lactic acid fermentation in the soil versus an alcoholic one. And then like a little bit, some things I noticed with the grain and watching other composting methods, like with kashi composting, is if I were to say leave my mixture of feed out and not feed it to the worms, just observe it. Like I'm seeing the mycelium mats, the streptomyces layers, all this stuff forming on my feed before the worms even have a chance to process it. So one of my theories is that the worms, allow this process to happen, need this process to happen, and then come in and eat that material. Leaving their casting behind, almost multiplying that material by ingesting it and then, putting it into granules.
So you use, what do you have, rolled oats, or what do you?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because it started off, are you guys, anybody familiar with Unco Industries and Wiggle Worm products? You see, they sell the worm package, basically, an idea. Which is like, who knows where the grain comes from, it's granular, it's all these different things mixed together. So it started off just ground oat that I didn't know maybe where it came from. Then I decided that I want to start growing this stuff. So I grow a lot of my own, but it's like I can't ever grow enough, really. So I'm trying to source it from great sources, like grain hay that's fed to horses. I try to get that and put it in the bins. So we're not doing rolled oats, we're giving whole oats, the whole hay, the straw, and the actual oat itself. And one thing I've learned by doing that is that we're getting a lot of sprouts. Now, sprouts normally with compost, like people don't want sprouts in there because it's a sign that it never went through thermophilic composting. Now with what I'm doing, I'm using the worms and beneficial bacteria to try to combat any kind of negative reaction that might be there, any kind of pathogen that might be there. And that's also why I use a non-manure base. So while using the sprouts, and so it's a common thing that it's not good to have sprouts in the soil, right? But with a worm bin in an enclosed system like I have, and these sprouts are happening, all the enzymes, all the carbohydrates, all the benefit of the sprout stays in our pots. Okay, and then one thing I learned in nature, like those enzymes, those bacteria, all that stuff that's in the sprout is like almost designed to attract microbes and attract worms, all that stuff in nature. So I realized when I started incorporating the whole plant grains and doing things like that, that I was actually seeing a more natural, habitat with the worms. Maybe not necessarily a better granule, but a better population of worm, like happier, seemingly more babies, just more life happening in there. So that's kind of what I was touching on earlier, to where I was like, trying so hard to get this granulized product. That was my motivation of starting the business, and then went to where, you know, everybody is top dressing with alfalfa meal, or, you know, this, or, you know, cottonseed meal, and all of these, you know, organic things that are seeds, and you could just add to a bin, you know, and let the worms break it down. And especially it being enclosed, nothing is being took away. See, the etiolated growth, are you familiar with etiolated growth? It's dark germination. So it means that it's all that energy that's in the seed, and it germinates and it sprouts. That was all energy stored in the seed. And once photosynthesis isn't available to make that continue, it just dies off and it's left in the pot. So then the worms proceed to process that. And then, I mean, it's just a theory of mine, but I mean, does everybody agree that like that enzymes and all those other bacteria would still be in the pot? I'm thinking, you know, so that's where I started not necessarily trying to worry about the way my product looked. When it's so important for the consumer, oh, this doesn't look pure, this doesn't look like pure granules. But for one, I've seen granules get minced in my 1/8" screen. To where I can see granules when I harvest out the pot. It's not the same thing coming down when I'm harvesting. So it's definitely been something I've been beating my head against the wall trying to do, and I'm not even sure if it's beneficial. You know, it might be more beneficial what I'm capturing in the bag now.
Absolutely. Your worry is you want to make a grain rather than your presentation, is what you're saying?
I'm sorry, what?
You're saying that you're worried about your presentation and compared to other people's product? Is that what you're talking about?
Like you were sourcing.
Yeah, exactly. Like exactly. Like there is one of my motivations, for instance, was a product out there, age-old organics, worm casting. Okay, they most likely sourced that for one, but two, it was just a visual look, and it was what I was familiar with long before it was popular in the industry. Okay, and then it got really popular in the industry. I started seeing other products on the market. It wasn't what I was familiar with, okay? So that was, I saw a need and I wanted to fill it. My wanting to fill was to get those pure granules. And like, so somewhere along the way, I realized that that uneaten material, that unprocessed material, you know, it's just as good because, I mean, it's all about where it starts. It's like my composted fir bark, you know, you could probably plant it in itself. Okay, then we rinse that product, we put it onto our conveyor, we spread it really thin, and that's where we blend in the other grains, you know, beneficial bacteria. I'm actually adding stuff that a lot of you probably buy, just to ensure that with my process, how I don't cook my soil or anything like that, that I'm definitely giving more of a population of the beneficials to combat. And since I started adding that, I didn't do that at first, you know, and it helped with other people in the industry see what I was doing and kind of sending me samples and opening my eyes to like, wow, if I add these bacteria now, and I add these fungi, like it's going to make the product better. At first I depended solely on the worm, like no, the worm's got all this. I believe 100% of the worm, but you could definitely give a little boost. And that's what, you know, some of these other inoculation type products are doing to the worm feed. You know, it puts them there and it builds on them.
So your problem with manure then is pathogens?
Yeah, like for a personal, like I mean, that's one of the things that I wrote, I mean, on a personal level. Like I'm an indoor worm farm.
Even grass seed?
Okay.
I'm an indoor worm farm, you know, and I just don't want to work around poop daily. And then so, I mean, in like horse manure, everybody knows that aged horse manure is a good thing, and I'm convinced like that's just grain. I mean, I broke up some the other day, and I held it up to my friend's nose, and he was like, "Is that just some kind of grain?" And I was like, "No, it's aged horse manure." He's like, "Oh, get it away from me," you know what I mean? But it's like the stuff. And horses, it's well known that they don't fully process their food, you know? And so it's coming out what they eat pretty much. And as it ages, it doesn't have any smell, you know. So that's the only stuff. But even then, it's like you have to have a product that's years old.
Yeah, you have to have it year old. You can't just put it out for 6 months and say.
Yeah, years even. I wouldn't even necessarily, like the stuff, I've used it in my compost before, right? And how I'm going to pick the stuff that I want to use is you don't even know it's a pile of horse manure. Like look at the grain knee-high grain growing out of it or something, and it's got a foot of stuff, that's the horse manure you wanna pull, you know?
We look for the gray, the
Yeah,
gray layer.
and then it goes one step above that to where it actually is growing out of it now, you know?
Right, it does, it produces, you get drip from seed.
Yeah, the gray is, I believe, just probably starting on fire, you know, some kind of thermophilic composting that,
It has to be,
yeah,
because it gets really hot in the center of that thing. I haven't measured or any of that stuff, but
right,
when we stir our pile, we look for the gray layer, and that tells us it's completely done and ready to go, and we mix it in with the fresh stuff to increase and keep doing it. And then
Yeah,
you add your
and like-
microbes, and you can do a lot of stuff.
and some of the, like, manure based, like steer manure, some of the best out there, in my opinion, the guys are adding plant-based materials to it to make it better, you know, grains or grasses, things like that, you know, so I don't think that you can have a good product without the grain. You know, the hard part is, like, everybody knows, like, there's so much bad grain. When I first started this business, I had a lot of negativity towards me because, oh, you're just spreading, you know, poison around with the grains you're using, but it was a benefit in a way, because it made me realize that I have to be conscious of this. I can't just go pick up any grain. You know, I just can't go to the store and just buy anything. I need to go and spend a little extra money on my inputs.
Well, if you think about it, that's what happens in nature, in the fields. Grass comes up, it sows the seeds, drops it, it gets thatch layer, all that stuff goes into the soil and produces what you're talking about.
Right. Yeah, I naturally make a mess, obviously, where I'm at, and a lot of this grain and floor sweep, it gets swept into piles, it gets added outside where we grow stuff in it. And like what amazes me the most is some of the grain just being swept together and winter happening. It'll create its own soil layer and sod. Like, anybody want to start a sod business, go out there, lay grain down, let it do its thing, and eventually you'll have grass, you know, growing in it. And that's what's amazing to me is, where does that soil come from? Where does that hume, you know, the worms, fungi. That's one of the things that when I transition from soil to worms, it's like, that's one of my little quotes I say. If it wasn't for worms and fungi, there wouldn't be soil.
Right?
You know, in a university level, the microbes get all the credit. They barely talk about worms, but the worm, you know, the microbes have no way to really move if it wasn't for the worm. You know, they grab them, they eat them, they spread them out, they keep them moist. And then especially dating back, you know, to when we didn't have technology, and just imagine an observation. You have barren land, you know, nothing's really happening, poor soil, and then you have stuff growing. What's going on? Dig in there and you're going to see those worms, little worms, you know. Aristotle, when he called worms the intestines of the earth, he wasn't just talking about earthworms. It's all of them.
That's really cool.
So that's cool, man. I think
So you've emphasized a lot of your inputs,
Yes, sir.
and so you have all these inputs. Then you have the earthworm. Let's just talk about the earthworm.
Right.
And the earthworm eats all the inputs and shits out, you know, what's left. So tell us about the worm casting. How does the worm casting differ from the inputs?
The worm casting different from the inputs. Well, that casting, the worm is going to eat those inputs in a way. The fungal layer that, you know, said grain leaves behind, they're going to eat. They're going to eat those, you know, the moisture left behind as well, you know, that the fungi leave. So I believe all of those, because they feed on subsoil.
Enzymes.
Exactly, on their own, right? We all have digestive enzymes, but so one of the things that the main diet in nature is subsoil yeast. So I mean, I don't know. One of the best things that one of these older gentlemen that's on a scientist level ever said to me is like, you know, Sean, we don't know everything, you know, and that's one of these things. Like, I couldn't go into detail to tell you exactly what's in that granule, other than a lot of the benefits of what they're eating. You can, for instance, Soil Sanctuaries casting, you know, if you Google them, they're a composted forest product. It's cardboard. They're a cardboard-based company. and that product doesn't test. So that has granules, you know, they're processing that material, but why doesn't it have any numbers? Why isn't it quality? And that's, they're not eating any enzymes, proteins, amino acids, minerals, vitamins to begin with.
Yeah, so the worm eats the fatty acids, eats the amino acids.
Yeah, they're triggered to eat the microbe, to eat that fungi, and that's honestly, I've debated, I'm convinced they eat some organic matter as well, because a lot of people say they just eat the microbes and just eat the fungi, but like with things like pumpkin, I've watched them. I don't know if the fungi is eating it fast and shitting humates and turning it into black, but I feel like the worms themselves. And I'm talking about, like, I'm constantly adding different materials to see what they do with the pumpkin. That's one thing that I stand by. Like, something about pumpkin they are ingesting. It's more than just the fungal break. I got pumpkins from a different area this year that it wasn't in the North State. It was more in the mid-state. They didn't respond the same. So, I mean, it's probably a little bit of both. You know, they need the fungal activity on there, but they need life to begin with.
So the plant will grow better with the worm casting than the inputs by themselves.
Guaranteed. And that's another thing that's happening. Why am I getting the sprouts? Why do I have these theories? Is because I put in this raw plant material, and you just see nature take place before you. It's like all the organic matter leaves, and the seed stays. Seed sprouts. Worms eat the remaining, the little bits that's left there that the seed gave, and they're on their way. There's no more food. So in nature, they're meant to take out all of that. You know, if you just look at the granule of wheat itself, when the worms start to process it, you'll see all the black in between their granules, in between the wheat granules, and then it sprouts. It's the same with the pumpkin. I was telling Nick earlier, it's like I could tell, or maybe it was Bob, I was telling somebody earlier, I could tell from a distance which pots of mine are heavily populated and doing really well just based on the sprouts. The vigor of the sprouts, how healthy everything is just growing out of it. So I'm convinced that granule, for one, I've looked at how much trouble I'm having. I don't know if people aren't out there rolling them or what's going on. I don't really know. I'd like to see a farm operate that's getting the pure granules.
Wonderworm does a multi-screening process, and always on shaker tables. So literally, what's coming out the bottom, whether it's even a granule of worm poop, or if it's just organic matter that's being shaped through this constant vibration through 12 screens into that little 1/16 of an inch ball. You know, I've seen their facility before and just gone, well.
Is it somehow forming the ball?
Well, I think just from the sheer vibration that's constant, the organic matter's, going through this wire mesh, and the last one is like a Play-Doh press. It literally is just shooting out little tiny droplets. But it's probably, because as a manufacturer, we get a lot of worm casting samples because everybody wants in.
Right.
I lab every one of them. And it's amazing how like 90 out of 100 samples are worthless. There's no bacterial, there's no fungal count, it's literally no nutrition, it's a humic, rich, black, nothing.
Now,
and to me, those are worthless.
Do you think, like one of my theories that it's prominent like that is the nature of the industry where there's not many farm directs. Like there's not many guys like me that are trying to put it in the bag.
Nobody's trying to put good inputs in. Everybody's going, like one guy, I asked him, what's your input? We feed him peat moss. Well, okay, great. You give me this brown ball of nothing. I mean, literally, peat moss fed worms are worthless worm castings. Right. But, they sell for $45 a bag. I would never buy that because if there's no lab count, there's no bacteria in there. When I lab your stuff, I mean, it is richer than Alaskan humus, which is virgin topsoil out of the Alaskan forest. They got more fungal count, more protozoa count. The bacteria diversity is through the roof. I don't want the damn ball. The ball is like for the market, for the sale. I want a compost that's living. I want worm casting. I want the eggs, the casings. Yeah. When I buy your bag and I throw it in a bag of potting soil, when I'm done feeding the crap out of it with heavy nutrients, I still get 30 to 40 worms per container at the end. That's telling me these things are not only alive, but they're filled with nutrition. They got a ton of minerals, the micronutrients that are available through that are just phenomenal.
Thanks,
So,
man. That's
There's a
honestly
lot of
why.
castings out that are just crap.
That's why I started off kind of talking about my transition and where I wanted to go
Yeah,
and where.
glad.
It's because I honestly couldn't sit here and be the best at science with you guys. I'm still learning all kinds of stuff, but what I am good at is observation,
Seeing it.
applying, seeing that it works, seeing that it's working well and responding well, and just trying to always further dial that in.
Well, and
Yeah.
I'll further that with yours, because I do get a lot of worm compost samples in too, because, I mean, I prefer the composted worm, but on that same accord, I get a lot with raw bark still in it. It's like a woody fiber, it's got, you know, yeah, if I rub it together, I've got humate, but it's this filler in there that I'm going, well, you know what, when worms just digest cellulose and only cellulose and they have no other input, you still have a worthless casting at the end. Yours is like, you just dug the center of a compost pile right out into a bag, and it's like, damn. I mean, if you want a compost tea, this stuff, I used to mix 3 different types of worm castings and Alaskan humus to get all my teas ready. Now I just throw a cup of this in there, and I get way more diverse compost teas from just 1 cup of that versus 3 cups of Alaskan humus, Wonder Worm, and, you know, BioLife. It's amazing how much better it works, so that's my 2 cents.
My understanding is that earthworm castings are filled with magnesium, phosphorus, nitrogen, over 60 nutrients, but it
Right.
also has pesticide applications.
Exactly.
The enzymes that they.
Yeah, let me just,
poop
since we're
out.
on that, like, that's exactly pesticide application right here. You know, as a foiler spray. It's like you can use it similar to drip coffee through a fine micron screen and then use it as your base. See, I've done a lot of experimenting with it, and I think it was promoting more of a good offense versus actually killing the pest. But
Well,
if
my
I think
understanding
if
is
you
that it's-
use it,
It has pesticidal properties.
it does have,
In other words,
like maybe if
in
you
the
were able to
soil.
concentrate it.
Pests like spider mites, for instance, don't like it.
Exactly, like that's what I'm talking about. Screening
You know,
through a micron and using it in your sprayer to combat against spider mites. Use that, so next time you do your IPM, rinse some casting, right? Slow drip some casting and use that as your base water.
sure.
Okay, and then mix in like you normally would, and you do that every time. Use the castings every single time. That's one thing about good castings and using it as a rinse that I like, not necessarily as a tea,
Right.
you know?
So how much castings would you use per, say, like a gallon of foliar spray?
Let me just skip back to your, it's about, I think it's 2/3.
2/3 of what?
2/3 casting per 1 gallon
Oh, right on.
of water.
It was the slide lower, it was down to 2 slides. You were on it.
Somehow they did.
Right
Oh,
there.
did I talk about what to use? Oh yeah, right there, I guess I did, right there, 2/3. I went into a little in-depth one on the other one.
Yeah,
So what I,
No, you still can't.
so what I hear Scott, you're saying
Yeah.
is, it's not really the casting, but it's the microbes
It's
in,
the life left
it's the
behind.
life left behind.
Yeah, and the
Passing
Yeah.
to.
Yeah, it's
the
so,
symbiotic relationship between the life and what the worm is producing, and when the worm is digesting that, it's creating the humate that all that life is living within.
so the worm is digesting cellulose.
Yeah, and
Every-
like you said,
And it's
it-
breaking
every
that
one of those
down,
great
it's
number
breaking
games
it
there.
down, so the microbes have a higher microbial content than if we didn't have the worms there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That's the benefit
On
of
a,
it.
on a, like to further, like to help you, look at what the worms are doing, Darwin extracted pancreatic fluid from the worm and applied this fluid directly to leaves and found that that fluid broke down organic matter. So like that's part of it too, is like their mucus. That's why I'm a big fan of, fresh casting, just because, and I had a guy that his business was
Yeah.
natural breakdown, and he would buy the casting just to make it in a tea and spray his bark with it.
So,
so without the worm, they're not inoculating for the bacteria and fungus to then continue the
Yeah,
organic
like,
breakdown.
seriously,
So it
Darwin
works
felt-
symbiotically.
Darwin felt the same way. If it wasn't for fungi and worms, there wouldn't be soil.
so we should emphasize in a pot, we got a 5-gallon pot, and we got a pot plant growing out of it. But in that, we should put worms
You'll
in.
know whether I did.
Yeah, now see, that's a big issue. A lot of people want to do that, and personally, I like worms in there. But if you get too many, they're gonna try to eat your roots. They will try to eat a weak plant. You know, that's their job, is to eat weak stuff, and hopefully the seed's there to sprout something better. You know, so if you have too much worms and not enough food, they will start to be invasive. I always would recommend somebody to use the worm outside of the garden, and then take that fresh worms with the that fresh worm casting with cocoons, with baby worms and all that, and use that. And then just hope for a natural cycle to happen in
And
your
it
pot.
does. With this stuff, it does. I mean, you don't just top dress with it a couple weeks into veg, and when you're done, you'll have a handful of worms that are tumbling through, and they're not big monster worms either. So you get aeration, you get drainage, and you just get more nutrient cycling, which
Yeah, that's one of the things that I started tripping on, is the baby worms themselves. Like, that's not really a normal process in worm farming, and it only happened because I ran out of space. So here it is that I now can't really expand the worms anymore, and I just have to keep them where they are. And that's caused more of a baby worm population than an adult population. And they have smaller granules, they have more aeration holes. Like, I'm convinced on these baby worms. Like, that could be part of it right there too, you know.
Baby poop.
Yeah, there are more casting per square inch with baby poop.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, their enzymes
Gnarly.
are too. The enzymes they have inside their stomach are.
like the babies
fresh,
specifically.
yeah, absolutely.
That would make sense. Yeah, if you think about, real baby poop, it's savage compared to an adult.
Life changing.
Yeah, buddy.
So when you bag it up into the bag, and you seal the bag,
And that's
How do
why
you
you
keep
gotta
it
have
live?
you keep the aeration holes on the top and bottom
Okay.
is key, and that's another benefit of having that seed in there. Like when I was just making the samples for everyone, there's several sprouts in some of those right now. So that helps, having there be food for the worm in there. That's one of the very first things I put on my website, like, hey, this uneaten feed is good. Before I even was grasping how good, I was like, hey, this still gives the worms that are in my casting something to eat. And if you were to just set this on the shelf, it's going to be better than what it was when we first bought it.
So it's a cash in exchange, basically. You can use it as a cash in exchange.
Yeah, I don't really know what that is, but
Well, it's basically what you're saying, providing food. You're setting the stage for the
yeah, in the beginning,
for the
that's
full
how I
cycle
would
to
talk
start.
about it. Like,
You know,
hey,
worms to get going,
leftover
food,
food.
then the microbes go out. I mean, it's just all a big circle.
Yeah, but the more I got into it, the more I started to realize how many nutrients out there are made from what I'm feeding the worm.
For sure, yeah.
You know, and that's like the alfalfa
That's
that
what
I'm
I mean,
giving,
it's
the
cash in
grasses,
exchange.
yeah, like that's the crazy part, you know.
Yeah.
And then so like further learning about the myceliums mat and like what their byproduct is, being black humate, like that's also, it amazes me. Is that at first I credited only the worm, like, oh, all this black is from the worm. But in reality, it's partly the bacteria's waste as well. So that's, I think, why I'm getting good numbers, you know, it's like we have that in everything we harvest. Every bag in here has pure humate in it. Broken down, not bought from somebody, not mixed in, like made. And depending on how long that bag sits there, like literally made as it sits there. Like the sprouts that I saw in some of these samples that I was making, they won't be there for long. And then what happens to it?
so how long
Humate.
is the worm castings been in a bag? How long have they been in a pot in your shop prior to packaging them up?
We have it's never shorter than 3 weeks. I'd like it to be a month. You know, and really what I'd really like is not even to go on time. Just to, okay, this has been a month, let's look. Yeah, pure. That's what I'd really like to go. I used to keep a binder, keep track of all the dates, all that stuff. I honestly go through and look at all the bins now. I just look and see how it's processed. You know, and I've had negative feedback, talk about filler, talk about this, that, but it's anybody, if you've been at the shop day one, everybody can see the difference between the feed and process bins. A child can see. You know, so it's like, yeah, other material gets in when we harvest, but never do we just fill, you know?
Well, and your filler, really, I mean, when we got our totes of that stuff, and you look in there and you say what somebody would claim to be filler, I look at that as, that's an inoculated fermenting piece of organic matter that has a fungal field and a bacterial load that's like putting compost tea right in yours. I mean, it's alive. All the like wood debris that you get from some of these guys, and you get a splinter in it, that's filler. That shit's never gonna be broken down with that moisture content, but when I see a chunk of leaf and a piece of broken grain, and I see my cilia growing up, I want that.
Well, you know, it's a trip about, I wonder what the worm does to it, because after rinsing my finished product, I can see that there's still some wood product in there, right? But it never gives you a slipper. My feed gives me slippers.
Yeah.
Like, so something about the worm's processing, even what comes out visibly still,
Yeah,
you
but
know.
you don't see it like most people's. I mean, that's it. If you find a little piece, it's like finding a peat stick in my
Yeah.
before soil. Good for you, you won the trophy. But
Right.
the reality is, it's not wood. It's not filler. It's 6,000-year-old.
You can take that, what people find, I see those posts, and if you just went like that,
Yeah, it's dust.
poof, that's what you wanted, that's what they should be doing,
Yeah.
crumpling it up and put it in their soil, you know?
Yeah, leave it there. It's a fungal house.
Yes, sir. I mean, some of the stuff I wrote down up here, you know, is just kind of different things that I've played around with. I was joking around, this one, for instance, like this is something that I came up with based on just fooling around, you know, being a brewer and having an idea of products breaking down. Like Frank obviously could tell you exactly what's happening here and what I'm doing, but I just can tell you that I fooled around with it and it works. You know what I mean? So I mean, it's really different. I mean, like if you look at how I add, it's similar to actively aerated with these steps here, and then.
So can you describe those steps, because I can't.
Sure, it's like right here you're adding a ½ cup per gallon of grain-fed worm casting. All right, then you add a 1/4 teaspoon brewer's yeast per gallon, and a 1/3 cup malted barley. And I thought the Nectar Fam folks would appreciate, you know, that's what I like to use as a molasses substitute. You know, I saw that, you know, everybody used molasses and everything online, and I've never liked it during growth stages. I've always finished with the product, and it's done amazing things, but that's because it's killing off everything, you know, you can tell. And so, I mean, that's the only time I've ever liked in cycles, you know, to use molasses is at the very end.
So you use a malted barley
Malted
flour,
barley, and there's
or
so
you
many,
throw
they have
malted barley seeds in.
the malted barley, you ground.
Ground
They
up.
have flour that's even more ground, just regular brewer's malted barley ground, not the seed. But not flour either, that would be more expensive. You can go as far as buying maltose if you want to spend $28 for 4 pounds or something. That would be amazing. I was thinking about doing it, really, but then as I was thinking about it, I realized that I think I'm just going to go raw sugar. Buying maybe, what do you think about buying?
You gotta be careful there, because that can also, if you have any present E. coli, that's instant E. coli outbreak. And that's like, yeah, Dr. Lanning will poop on that real fast, because the sugar itself will create the E. coli outbreak.
Not as necessarily in a feed, I was thinking about it in my
No, as a
brews.
brew, yeah.
Okay.
Because a lot of people were doing that when compost tea first launched, you know,
Yeah,
15,
raw
20 years
sugar.
ago. And that was a big issue, why none of the municipals would let them use them in parks and
Good to know.
local landscapes, because the sugar would
So
be
you
E.
would
coli.
go with the upgraded.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly, cane sugars and, you know, maltose, and these are all the ones that, and that's what the bacteria really wants anyway. We
Right.
like sugar, microbes don't.
Right.
I mean, it's crack.
And then I remove the air. I do that for 72 hours. I remove it. Then I'm trying to promote more of a brew, like actually brewing, and I add a little SLF and 1 tablespoon per gallon. And then really where it's different is I'm doing this lactose bacillus brevis right there, where it's what they use in sour beers, and it's what makes sure that this doesn't go alcoholic on me. In a way, it keeps it a lactic acid fermentation. Brew 1 to 2 weeks, and then you can dilute that 1 part this and 4 parts water, and it'd be really similar to like a compost. I saw a liquid compost on the market. I think it's great big plants or something like that. Like you could dump the whole bottle, and it's something similar, you know, like because they're able to keep that still good, but it's not aerated. you know, so that's kind of what I was going for there, is just having something that's, you know, anaerobic and still good. And then what we've all been doing, you know, in NorCal, when it was just like, hey, fill this sock, you know, with something, and it was, so a half cup per gallon of grain-fed, 1/3 cup fresh bagged or fresh even from the farm chicken manure. And then 1/3 cup the malted barley as your molasses substitute. And then I recommend using the Vortex brewer with this, just adding it in loose. And then if you don't have the Vortex brewer, I like oxygen in the tea bag and then below too. So just both to make sure, you know, the microbes are still breathing. You're getting the whole, you know, actively aerated. Bill right here, Bill Burns came up with this one, and what was cool about him messaging me this is it was, he had one of my workers, he's gonna like that, he's gonna see it right away, he's always like, too easy, boss, so, for you, man. And then, so when he brought this to me, is like, it reminded me a lot of what I've been doing here. Like if I can, besides soil, recycling, this is one of the things I use worm casting the most. I don't really do many brews. I don't do all that stuff. I rinse a lot, you know, either in my foiler or just right in the bin before as a base water. Like I think it's great. When I first started using it, I always, I never really liked the fade that everybody, if it goes too hard. And I noticed the casting keeps just that nice light green there, you know. You don't have to add and bloom, you know. And you just keep the worm casting going the whole time all the way to the end. I noticed it has a nice earthy taste, you know. That was really where it all started, just adding little bits of worm casting, seeing major things, and just like, hey, I need to learn more here. You know, and then the soil thing, like I told you, it's like doing soil and seeing like, okay, people buy worm casting, or they have a worm farm. There's some soil companies out there that have worm farms that don't even sell worm castings. They're just using it in their soil. Royal Gold's one of them. You have to be a local to get their worm casting. You know, and they're using all of what they produce in their mix. Like, good stuff. I recognize you use Royal Gold, don't you?
Yeah, we switched over to number 4, and we're actually combining the two.
Yeah.
I'm throwing experiments at it too.
That's
I mean,
how
I've got nothing. I mean, we use the whole.
Write them
box.
down, or else you end up like me with just a bunch of shit in your head.
I was. Oh, you have no idea, man. The old ADD at its finest. I'm telling you.
Yeah.
They say it's a sign of genius. I'm gonna go with that.
There you go.
We'll just stick to our green thumb and stuff.
I speak plant. That's what I tell people. I like plants better.
Yeah.
You know.
You have me over casting, man.
I think that's it, everybody. Any other questions or anything like that? Oh yeah, I didn't really go into the too easy. That was basically just a rinse, and then we add in the SLF just because I noticed once I started doing that, the water got darker, just plain and simple, and everybody knows that it responds well. So I was noticing that it's definitely helping break down the casting, you know, just in the rinse. Anybody know why? I mean, I was noticing that just using it in my rock wool, it was changing breaking down my rock wool.
What, the teas?
The SLF.
Oh, because it's an enzyme that's producing acid and rock wool's limestone, so basically it's acid and limestone. Well, I mean, you take rock wool and add pH down to it, it's a liquid tomorrow. Yeah. So it's the same thing, it's just enzymatically breaking
Like a lot of
down the
pH
limestone.
down, huh?
Not really, I mean, I can take a tablespoon of pure phosphorus, put it on a slab, and it'll be half melted in the morning. That's how you get rid of rock wool safely, is you just process it through like organic acids.
Okay.
Don't landfill that shit. Just put
Yeah,
it
no.
on,
I just leave it in with the soil. It's eventually goes.
Yeah, if you have a lot of microbial life, it should disappear
Yeah.
because the organic acids produced through the microbes will break down the limestone.
Yeah, and grow big plants too, and then it breaks apart. You know the.
Yeah, mycorrhizal will consume that
Yeah.
because it's a mineral, and they'll turn that into food for the plant.
So that's all we do. We got 2 5-gallon buckets. It's 1 to 2 cups grain-fed worm casting, where we just pour the worm casting into the bucket, fill it up with water, splish splash back and forth. You could either pour it through a screen and use it in your like that, use it in your sprayer, or you could just literally use that material as a top feed. Just if you keep it, splish splash back and forth, keep it moving, and mixed up, you'll have an even distribution of the casting that way, and so it's an easy way to apply. But yeah, teas are good, but you can't use them all the time. I mean, the same one, you can't apply worm casting, every single time with a tea and just have it go as well as just a worm casting by itself. So I kind of wanted to talk a lot about like the rinsing one, like Bill's method there, and mine, which is just like similar to brewed coffee. You use warm water. And with a tea bag, you stick the input water in there and you let it just slowly drip through. It might take forever to fill up a 55 gallon, but once you do, you'll see it was worth it. You might want to circulate that after it's done too to make sure nothing's settled, but for the most part, it's good. Anybody got any questions?